Well, thanks for joining me once again, everyone, where once again we unfortunately have to deal with recidivist offenders against the science, the logics, the truth. It's Peter Attia again. So let's dive straight into our critique of what Peter has had to say, and I shall provide for you corrections that I feel are warranted, the logic by which I feel that the correction is warranted, and I promise to cite exactly the same number of peer-reviewed studies as Peter Attia does while making his statements here in this video, many of which would require some kind of underpinning in terms of empirical evidence to suggest that the interpretation is indeed empirically supported, which is what science is all about. So let's learn some science. Off we go.
Why do you think it is that people are so dogmatic about cholesterol and its impact on atherosclerosis? Like, a lot of people want to assert, if I have no inflammation, I'm insulin sensitive.
Insulin sensitivity is a construct, Derek. It's an idea. It's a model. It's not an actual physiological parameter. There is no meter you can buy from any company which is an insulin resistance meter. Just keep that in mind.
Etc. I can't have plaque accumulation, and as long as I stay metabolically fit and healthy, then it's not a concern.
Well, that's a statement that can't actually be supported nor refuted, Derek, because actually it relies entirely on opinion. Because what's metabolically fit and healthy? How would you define that? How would that be measured? Put your scientist hat on. Oh, that's right. You're not a scientist. You're the host of a popular YouTube show. My bad.
Like, are these people just completely neglecting everything intentionally to not make their diet models seem bad? Or
okay, so why are we ignoring this hypothesis around low-density lipoprotein, so-called cholesterol, and heart disease? Well, Derek, I'll tell you why it's being largely ignored in the carnivore community. It's because it is false. It's a hypothesis which is demonstrably incorrect. What do I know, though? I'm only a cardiovascular pathophysiologist, among other things, Derek. I really think that making statements about what is true, what is fact, what is established, and what science says should probably be left to those of us, Derek, who have some experience in that field. I wonder why you don't think that. What's next?
What do you think is I just have a hard time wrapping my head around
many concepts.
Somebody who has almost a self-induced familial hypercholesterolemia level.
Okay, right. So self-induced and familial probably could be put together, but that would be fairly tortured, wouldn't it? Because familial generally refers to the genes alone, and I do understand absolutely that genes react to the environment in which you place them. Perhaps you don't understand that, Derek, but that is true nonetheless. And hypercholesterolemia is a value judgment statement based on a threshold value above which an interpreting so-called authority will deem that to be aberrant or problematic in some way. What we're yet to see, however, from the scientific community is any evidence that the assertion is correct, cause and effect. There are some inferences out there, which we'll probably discuss in this video. The quality of those inferences is scientifically destitute, actually. Sorry about that. Right, let's carry on, make some progress.
From their carnivore diet saying something like, don't worry about it.
Right. Okay, so the question, just because I've been interjecting so much, is Derek wants to know why we're all avoiding this cholesterol fact about heart disease to try and make our carnivore diet look better, and what's up with that? All right, Peter, off you go.
I don't know that I can answer that question, and I certainly have spent some time in the past trying to understand that.
Well, it's not possible, Peter, to understand why someone would do something that you personally find incredulous without any actual evidence that your incredulity is warranted. It's called the personal incredulity fallacy. Why on earth would they do that? We all know that's a silly thing to do. Well, Peter, that's begging the question fallacy on top of the earlier fallacy, isn't it? Your assertions around the etiological underpinnings, the cause of heart disease, Peter, are in error, demonstrably. And we'll get to that, I'm sure.
And I've even used the example of FH to try to make the point, right? So
you've used the example of a construct, a decision about the status of someone based on ignorance, to prove a point. How's that going to work, I wonder, scientifically?
People watching us who don't know what that is. So FH is a disease called...
No, it isn't, Peter. It's a decision about the level of cholesterol in someone's blood based on an assessed rather than measured, an estimated value of a lipoprotein called LDL on the basis of what the total is without actually even measuring that. I mean, there's some great science here in this field, some great science being done.
Familial hypercholesterolemia, and it's actually the second most common genetic cause of atherosclerosis.
Dear, oh dear, Peter, there's the word cause, isn't it? False. There is no cause and effect evidence extant anywhere in the literature on this planet or any other planet you might find yourself on at any stage, Peter. I'm sorry, but as an empirical scientist first and foremost, I absolutely have to correct your false statement there. No, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's a disease.
No, it isn't still. No. Disease, why might the level of the low-density lipoprotein be increased in a person's blood? This is the thought process that seems, in my experience, to elude most medically qualified individuals like Peter here. Rather than asking the question, why is this occurring, it's an if-then decision node tree. If the patient presents thusly, then this is how you act. You prescribe this drug, come and see me in 6 weeks. And that's why you've got this wrong, because you actually don't appreciate the science, Peter. I'm sorry. Okay, what's next?
Genetic disease, but it's a polygenic disease.
All right. So it's a disease defined entirely by the level of cholesterol, as it turns out is the actual thing measured in the blood. How often, though? What is the baseline variability of measurement? What's the noise around this? Where are our confidence intervals? How do we know a person has this disease just because they have a genetic set which might predispose them to express that? Should those genes be placed in a certain set of circumstances, environments that would precipitate those factors coming forward? The genes that we have, Peter, are the peak of the positive and negative selection-driven process of evolution. We are the peak of it. Our genes survived everything that's ever been to get to this point. They know what they're doing. The actions of genes is somehow now being falsely categorized and characterized by the medical fraternity as a disease.
And it's very heterogeneous, meaning it's not like Huntington's disease, where there's one gene that causes the disease, or even LPA, where the single LPA gene leads to elevated Lp(a), which is actually the most common familial form of atherosclerosis. Here,
goodness gracious, Peter. LPA is not a form of atherosclerosis. I'm sure you misspoke there or didn't think about what you were saying. Wow. And again, you've just inferred cause and effect. And once again, Peter, I have to correct you. There is no cause and effect evidence extant.
You have literally thousands of different mutations that all produce the same phenotype.
How do you know, Peter? Have you ever read one of these Mendelian studies and got a series of case histories of that person's actual blood cholesterol levels over time, all 300 and something thousand usually of them? Have you seen that? Do you know these people actually expressed a higher level of the low density lipoprotein, as it turns out? No, you don't. You have a bunch of people who are categorized according to genes which may be on or off in terms of that gene being activated, transcribing the protein that it's concerned. And when you've got multiple SNPs, you've got multiple different proteins from multiple different sources. Good luck tracing all of that stuff, cause and effect. When can you start, Peter? I hope this is starting to go up some flagpoles.
And the disease is defined by the phenotype, not the gene. Right.
So the disease is being expected to probably have higher low density lipoprotein in the blood without that ever actually being established as occurring. Good.
Type. So FH is defined by having an LDL cholesterol greater than 190 milligrams per deciliter.
Again, no, Peter, how do you know? Or is this a one-off reading, in which case its validity is... No? Okay, good.
So what do we know about people with familial hypercholesterolemia?
This is crazy. I don't know shit about fuck.
Very little, because A, we don't know they actually have it. What they have is a SNP or several SNPs or multiple SNPs, which might predispose them that way, depending on circumstance. That's about all, Peter.
Well, we know that regardless of their metabolic status...
Okay, so we're going to disregard something. Scientifically, that sounds pretty sound. Let's just disregard things, shall we? Oh, that's right. You already have been.
Regardless of their inflammation.
All right, so let's ignore a known precipitant of cardiovascular dysfunction. That's a great plan.
Regardless of how high their HDL is and how...
Again, that's another associate that's thought to be negatively associated with heart disease. That's actually false too, so don't worry about that one.
How low their triglycerides are and all...
Same deal. Triglycerides, no, not causal.
All the other things that people in this camp want to talk about, they still get accelerated atherosclerosis at an enormous rate.
Right. Would you like to cite us some evidence empirically that that is so? Because the only thing you will be able to provide for us in that regard would be some kind of prospective cohort, which will be completely uncontrolled and then adjusted under the false logical construct that a multiple regression analysis is able to tease out causality when it's not. Of course, you'd need to be a statistician to understand that that's a fact. Another reason why you probably shouldn't be commenting on the science, Peter.
And their atherosclerotic risk can be...
Ooh, I wonder how many of my people were quicker on the button there than I was even. Risk, you say, Peter? No, risk is a cause and effect statement. There is no cause and effect data extant on any of cholesterol, any of the lipoproteins that carry cholesterol and other lipids, any subfraction of those, any particle size of those, any count of those. None of these things have been causatively associated with atherosclerosis, heart disease. Why do I say risk is a cause and effect statement? Let's cover that off. Well, Peter, let me ask you this. You just said risk. Whose risk? Mine? Well, number one, does the cohort concerned represent me? Probably not, so it's probably invalid anyway to extrapolate it to me. Because I'm a special population, Peter, of n equals 1, me. So if you're going to tell me that my individual risk is absolutely impacted by a behaviour that you've associatively looked at, well, you're going to have to give me a mechanism of that risk, cause and effect. It's basic Newtonian physics, actually, that one. So provide me with a mechanism or stop saying risk. Right, what's next?
Almost completely attenuated by lipid-lowering therapy.
Well, isn't that interesting? Again, you're talking about attenuating risk. Well, no, risk is an assessment of the likelihood of an event in a given individual, if you're going to apply risk to that person individually, as you are now doing, Peter, by speaking to people individually on a YouTube video, telling them about their risk.
In fact, if lipid-lowering therapy is initiated early enough, and now that we have better and better genetic screening for this, we're able to treat people in their teenage years when
administering a metabolic poison to an individual is treating them, is it, Peter? Have you read the Hippocratic Oath at all?
they have this condition, they go on to live normal lives. But the key is, because it's basically an area under the...
So now you've just made a sweeping generalization to what happens in people who do a certain thing, all people. You've provided no reference to a study, even a cohort study, which still can't inform us on cause and effect anyway. It's just an association. So long as it hasn't been adjusted, by the way. As soon as you adjust an observation, that's not what you observed anymore, is it, Peter? Something you made up on the basis of your multiple variate regressions and the false logical construct that those are valid and able to tease out causality. No! All right.
Curve problem. How high and how long is your exposure to ApoB?
Right, so Peter just said the problem is it's an area under the curve problem. He's now saying that your time exposure to LDL cholesterol throughout your life is the risk factor for your heart disease, which it isn't, Peter. But okay, fine, carry on.
So, if you don't diagnose somebody with FH until they're 50, they might not live a totally normal lifespan.
That's the great thing about the word might, isn't it, Peter? It leaves the other thing entirely on the table. They might too. And you have no way of distinguishing the odds of each one of those outcomes occurring. None at all, because there's no data extant that would allow you to do so. It's a theology that you're espousing here, Peter, not scientific facts. Okay?
But if you diagnose somebody at 20, they almost assuredly will.
Almost assuredly will, according to whom, Peter, on the basis of what empirical evidence of any kind? Still none? Thought so.
Provided you get the LDL low enough. So,
No, goodness gracious me. That's for another day.
Again, I've never heard a compelling answer for why FH isn't at least one model here. Furthermore,
Model for what, Peter?
the Mendelian randomization
Here we go.
very clearly establishes the causality of LDL.
False, Peter. Completely, absolutely, utterly false. That statement is vacuous, destitute, and shows an infantile understanding of the logic of inference, scientific lines of inquiry. Mendelian so-called randomization is another example of associative data sets. X versus Y. They establish association and nothing else. Association between a gene set and some other factor, with of course an error, a noise around the signal, which is vast, by the way, Peter. Mendelian so-called randomization, by the way, is also not randomized because subjects are self-selected by virtue of what genes they in fact carry. Also, you look at the demographics table on the subject pools in such Mendelian studies, Peter, and you will find any number of confounds, collinearities, covariates that completely, absolutely erode and undercut the ability of any such study to inform on causality in any way. I think we're done with that one before you even tell us what Mendelian randomization clearly shows, because what you've just showed us, Peter, is that you don't know what Mendelian randomization even is by way of its logical construction to a set of outcome statistics by which a scientific conclusion can be drawn. And it may not be in line with the scientific conclusion of the people that collected and are reporting that data, because often that last paragraph is bought and paid for, Peter, in science, unfortunately, because it's interpretive. It's the only part of a scientific paper that can be interpretive. That's where the authors write what they're paid to write, about what their numbers proposedly say. You should look into that.
So I suppose you would have to come up with an argument, which I am not aware of.
Well, that's the problem, Peter. You're out of your depth and out of your lane in this field. You are not a cardiovascular pathophysiologist.
It would say, even though LDL is causal.
It's not, though, Peter. So you're begging the question for the rest of the sentence, whatever it is. Fallacy. Dirt.
Because you can't dispute that.
Dirt. Yes, we can, and we have. All we need to do to dispute your claim of causality is invite you to provide the empirical data set that shows us that causality is in effect here. It does not exist, Peter. Sorry, I didn't write the science rules or what the scientific disciplines are. I'm just using them appropriately and responsibly as an actual science practitioner. And what you're doing is absolutely disgraceful. Please stop.
I mean, not if you understand mathematics and science.
Yeah. I'm just going to leave that one there.
Even if LDL is causal,
Which it isn't.
There's something so protective about my fill-in-the-blank diet that it...
Right, so you're begging the question. Your whole construction from this point on has no value in the universe, Peter, because it's based on a lie.
offsets any of the harm of LDL.
Harm? No, that's cause and effect statement. There is no evidence to support that claim extant still.
In a way that the person with familial hypercholesterolemia,
Again, which is still a construct and just a decision about a person. Based on what, by the way?
who's eating a normal diet doesn't have.
What's a normal diet, Peter?
Even though on the surface, by all measurable accounts, we're both the same insulin sensitivity, low
But
inflammation,
that's also a construct.
etc.
How do you distinguish what the inflammatory status is? Just by doing an HSCRP test, Peter? Fairly good, but not necessarily entirely robust, is it? In terms of catching everything and whatever?
Again, part of what makes this difficult is that people confuse causality with sufficiency.
Shit. Now Peter Attia is going to tell us about confusing causality when he's just made the most basic fundamental error in causal assertion making that it is possible to make repeatedly over the last 4 minutes and 17 seconds of his video. All right, tell us how we're wrong, Peter.
And again, this is where I think everybody would benefit from just like a very simple course in formal logic.
Oh, right. No, formal logic is the last thing you need. Goodness sake.
And maybe philosophy of logic or something like that, right? So,
Oh, right. So we'll all go to Professor Nicholas What's-His-Face, will we? The one who believes that the way to stop all animal deaths is to kill all animals. Probably strictly correct, but he's claiming that to be his ethical position. We should do this, he says. Let's wipe everything out. Reset. Anyway, this is not a video about Nick. Get some help, Nick. Seriously, son.
so what happens is it's sort of like your grandmother smoked a pack a day her whole life and she's
No, she didn't, though, Peter.
totally fine. Therefore, smoking is
And
fine.
my grandmother died at 79, and she didn't smoke.
Yeah.
Right. That you got to be very careful when you cherry pick.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy.
Because you can get burned.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that smoking isn't 1,000% more likely to cause lung cancer because
That's actually 11,500% is the association, Peter. Did you not even read those statistics before you started making your statements around smoking? 11,500% relative increase in the incidence of lung cancer associated with a pack year of smoking, per pack year of smoking. Dose response, dose associative relationship. Okay? That's pretty big.
grandma didn't get it.
Really? That's it? Okay, that was abrupt. That was the end of Derek's little section of a much longer discussion there with Peter Attia. Peter, absolutely appalling from start to finish. Absolutely unacceptable disinformation from you. A destitution, clearly, of the understanding of statistics, science, scientific inquiry, the establishment of cause and effect, or anything remotely close to that, or the meaning of such statistics in such instances in any case, because the difference between the smoking stuff at 11,800% and any aspect of any dietary intervention around LDL levels and outcomes, 2/3 of 5/8 of nothing. Statistically significant findings, but nothing of any utility to any given living human being if you could extrapolate back to that individual person's risk anyway from such a thing, which you cannot. All right, join me next time when someone will be less wrong than Peter Attia, probably. All right, see you then.